Perfect.
Hey, everybody.
Yeah.
While we're signing in and everything, I'm Jessica. I'm one of the CBI board members. I have the information about the next one of these. It will be Thursday, July 23rd at 3 p.m. Eastern. It will be called Painting Pictures with Sound, about audio storytelling with Higgenberg, one of our sponsors. Their creative director is going to do that one. All the information will be on our website, obviously, and we'll put it out on the listserv. And that's all I'm gonna do, just saying hey and then handing it over to Laura and CJ.
Yeah, just hopping right off that. If everyone wants to look in the chat, you're more than welcome to introduce yourselves in there. It's just 1 o'clock, so I think we should get going to start on time. Reminder that at any point, if you want to rename yourself to include your pronouns, your station, and your little name, that's really helpful for us to know who's here, and also to address you the way that you'd like to be addressed. And CJ has a really great topic of conversation for this meeting, so it's going to be fun.
Cool. I guess that means I can take it away.
You're ready. I'll flip through the slides.
Great. Yeah, so my name's CJ Simonson. I work over at Planetary Group, which hopefully a lot of you are familiar with. We're a promoter based in Los Angeles. The Planetary Group's been around for, I would say 22 years, but I feel like I've been saying that the whole time I've worked here, so that can't possibly be true. But for a while, for over, I'd say probably about 25 years, we've done a ton of stuff in that time. Our founder, Adam Lewis, is from Boston, so the company used to be based out there, and we've run the gamut, the whole swath of the music industry. So yeah, I'm excited to be here. I've been at Planetary Group for just about 2 years now. I see some familiar names popping up in the chat too, so that's exciting. And I focus mostly on college and a little bit of alternative specialty radio. So probably most of you deal with college more specifically, but Planetary works in non-commercial, AAA, alt specialty, kind of the wide range of radio in the world. And just a little bit about me. I went to Chapman University in Orange County. I'm from Arizona originally. That's actually where I'm at right now. I thought I was escaping Los Angeles, and instead I went to the hotbed of the country in multiple ways. But yeah, I have degrees in film studies and public relations and advertising. And I'm the music editor over at a site called Merry-Go-Round Magazine, which is kind of what parlayed into radio. I worked in marketing for the university, and then through connections and stuff ended up moving up to LA and doing radio promo now. So it's definitely exciting. Feel like lots of people, the end goal is always to be in the music industry, do that thing. And so here we are. I worked at my station, Chapman Radio, which is an online only station. Used to be named KNAB. We had a small signal in Orange County, and then eventually turned to online only, like I feel like lots of stations are doing these days. And yeah, pretty exciting. We're always on the Princeton Review list of best stations, or we have been the past several years. So it's definitely an exciting place to be doing music in kind of a weird pocket of California. But yeah, that's a little bit about me.
I'll just chime in and say hello as well. I'm Laura Mooney. I'm the general manager of WKNC 88.1 over at NC State in Raleigh, North Carolina. I also have the honor of serving as the student representative of CBI this year, which has been a really exciting undertaking, and also extremely difficult because, I feel like this is the weirdest year CBI has ever had. Outside of those formal roles, I also work within the DIY tour booking community, using my own promotional company called Beowulf Booking that operates in and within the Triangle of North Carolina, setting up shows for artists across the country. And I'm just generally a post-hardcore fanatic. So not nearly as prolific as CJ, but still excited to be here.
I mean, post-hardcore, pretty prolific. Yeah, cool. So, I mean, I'll be pretty upfront immediately and say that largely when Laura and Max, another person at Planetary, kind of approached me to do this, ultimately, I feel like the answer of how to promote during this current moment could be met with just a kind of a shrug and go, I don't know, because ultimately nothing I'm going to say here, I feel like I mean, these are just our, Planetary's kind of experiences through this entire thing, but ultimately I feel like we're all kind of in this weird moment together. And so I don't, I definitely don't have the answers. Every day feels like we learn maybe something a little bit new, whether or not that's how to communicate with stations or even what stations are, how they're operating, so I definitely want this to be more of a conversation than anything else, because I would hardly call us an authority on anything, as I can't really call anyone an authority on everything happening right now. But I'm happy to like be here to give you kind of any insight, as at least from a promoter background, of how we've approached everything that's happening in this current moment, and be that the Black Lives Matter movement or particularly COVID, as that's kind of been the thing that's, I think, displaced and changed a lot of the radio landscape. So happy to jump into that right now. The first thing I think that's super important to jump into is just communication. I think that's the thing that's changed the most not just for us in the way that we communicate with stations, but also I'm hearing how stations communicate with each other. And internally how they communicate. Obviously, the world went from being a very in real life IRL kind of model to suddenly everyone was digital only. We were all displaced and figuring out ways to make technology work for us. But communication has felt, more essential and honestly at a premium more than ever. Behind the scenes, especially for Planetary, and I'm sure some of the people in this chat will know this, and attending this talk will know this. A lot of promoters and Planetary especially, our emphasis is on catching you on office hours, finding you on the phone if we can. That's something that has kind of radically shifted, I think, over the past several years. That the modus operandi for us is, how can we contact the station the most meaningfully we can? And so sometimes that means I'm tracking with people on Facebook or on Instagram, but now even more than ever, the ability to find people on the phones just can't be the first way that we talk music, that we talk about the station, that we talk about radio. And so that shift to an emphasis on email has been, a pretty, I don't want to say a profound one, because everything has kind of been moving in that direction anyway. It feels like over the past several years, and not just in radio, but, in life. But definitely recently, it's, we've worked with tons of stations where their music director simply isn't in an office. We currently have an intern at Planetary who is the music director at KPSU, and they've been figuring out ways to be a music director from their hometown in San Diego, despite being miles and miles from Oregon for the past, 6-7 months. So it's definitely kind of an interesting time to figure that out. And communication has been key to that. How is it that how can we learn that information? How can we know best how to serve you? One of the things that I think has changed a lot too is from our business end. Planetary is a business. We have clients and stuff, but also things like physical mailings, right? Like those are like, without communication, with all of you, we don't really have a way of knowing what the status update is on the station at any given time. So knowing when to send physicals, when not to send physicals, how much of a reliance on automation maybe you have, how much of your reporting is being done just based on kind of remote guessing versus how often are you going into the studio. We have like a running list of every station that we track with, and hopefully as up-to-date information as we can through all of this. But again, at the end of the day, without knowing definitively or without hearing from stations, the best way we can interact with you is definitely through email. Cool. Yeah, so promotional projects. What Planetary obviously works kind of in this larger musical machine that's pretty heavily reliant on touring. I'm sure everyone has seen all the pretty dour stories, not just of people attempting to book shows during this time and or get strategic and crazy with it. I know Live Nation's trying to do drive-in concerts. I have no idea how those will work. And and so we're part and parcel to that, right? Like, I'm sure you've seen, if not from Planetary, from other promoters, pitches on in studios and interviews and ticket giveaways, and a lot of that stuff has just gone away, which is, a bummer. and we're all trying, and that's one of those places where we're all trying to kind of adapt, adjust, figure out ways to serve artists that is going to be as helpful to them and as possible, right? A lot of that has turned into streaming in studios. If you followed KEXP at all recently, I mean, a lot of their model, or the Tiny Desk model, or things along those lines, have pivoted to something that can happen on YouTube or Instagram Live or Facebook Live or whatever. And that's certainly true of the way that we're trying to think about things. And I would say, what those things look like can be as creative as possible. If it's a Twitch stream, if it's, whatever it is that your station might be cooking up, feel free to pitch it. We don't have all the answers, and honestly, I don't think any artist does either. So, the world is your oyster, as it were. If there's something that your station's attempting to get off the ground, be it a digital festival or some kind of interview series or a podcast kind of thing or whatever, something that would work in this remote sphere, let us know. At the end of the day, we're just going to turn around to an artist we represent or a label or a client and say, hi, like, this station is attempting to do this thing. And if they say no, they say no, but you might as well ask, is always, my approach to things. So definitely always be weighing that kind of like new versus classic idea, like, obviously, and this is true in non-COVID times too, I think, but especially right now, a lot of the classic models of promoting records have gone out the window. And so we're all trying to kind of reckon with that.
We've also got the next slide, as I'm sure CJ is about to get into, has a list of ideas that we'll be able to like talk and share, and things that we've seen happen currently. Just because I know writing down new versus classic ideas doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, I think I get, I think hopefully you'll get what you mean with that. I'll jump into the next part, and then we can maybe get into the details of that.
For sure.
Yeah, cool. I mean, the last thing, and this might seem, I feel like it seems kind of obvious, but maybe it's obviously not. But it's just, I think empathy is like at the core of like everything that hopefully we're doing, and hopefully guides a lot of the way that we, approach this industry, be it radio or the music industry at large. And I think that's been, as true right now as it ever has been. Attempting to be an empathetic human being first and a promoter second should always be, I think, our mission. Frequently I try and sign off my emails or, approach contacting music directors as, this entire time feels very optional, right? Like, music can feel very trivial. And I think music can be very healing and central to, the way that we emotionally grapple with things. That's the way that I've always approached it. But I think that right now, especially, I know most music directors on the level of the music that they like, and we have that kind of relationship, but I don't know the things that are going on behind the scenes, and I don't want to pretend that I do. So, if directors get back to me and tell me honestly, like, music is the last thing I'm thinking about, I get it. I don't even know how I would, I'm fortunate in a lot of different ways. And one of those is that I'm not having to worry a lot about, my finances, or, whether or not the station goes away tomorrow, or things going on behind the scenes. And that's true in non-COVID times, and it's especially true right now. Like, there's a lot of stress being put on everyone. And so I think that approaching promotion as, I'm here for you, and if you don't need me right now, that's fine. I totally get that. And I include my number at the bottom of every email to say, if you want to track, great. Like, if you just want to shoot the shit, I'm here for it. We don't even have to talk about the records that I'm pushing or anything about radio. If you just need a voice, I get it. It's pretty isolating times. And I think that is the way that that anyone in this industry should be approaching most things right now. But now especially, I've definitely gotten feedback from several people that have really embraced the normalcy of this entire routine. Planetary is kind of our weeks look the same, as I'm sure you can imagine, based on the regular, the way that you get our emails and the recency with which you hear us, and the way that the charts always fall on one day and other things fall on the other days, I've found a kind of mental calming with the fact that like every week kind of looks the same, and that definitely helps me get through things. And so I've definitely heard from other music directors that they have appreciated that there's this kind of like routine to our world. And so just food for thought as something that's been communicated to me. And then the last few things is just, you know, in a lot of Planetary's messaging, we've tried to offer resources, you know, through COVID, but especially through Black Lives Matter, whenever we have it available. And I think we still include those in our fuller emails, and I still eventually will include them in parts of my tracking emails to stations. But seems like that's the right thing to do in, you know, in every way, but also just to give people info. You know, all of this feels like an info share, you know, like I said at the top of this, like we're all experiencing it at the same time. And I don't like to pretend that that's happening in a vacuum. So anything we can do to help you or you know, share information, I think is helpful. I think there might be more information on that later in the presentation.
Definitely. And so this is a couple ideas that we've compiled that we've either seen in the industry or that can be revamped from classic concepts. I can touch on these a little bit as I have some links. I think it would be a little disorienting for me to play any of the videos, but I can make this presentation public to anyone who wants it after this meeting, so you can check things out. Some of the classic ideas that we've seen going around are phone interviews. They are always going to be reliable when we're doing remote work. They can be blogged or transcribed, and I know that WKNC, my home station, has been doing podcasts over Zoom and Discord. Many of your universities may provide Zoom, and Discord is free to download, and you can record those conversations and thus podcast. Of course, there is a degree of quality decline that we may see working remotely as we no longer have access to university provided resources or the station equipment. But I think if your goal is to consistently put out this content, then it's valid to look into other avenues when we're not allowed to be in studio. And as per usual, written reviews of music are incredibly helpful. You'll see CJ and Planetary pushing albums all the time, and just writing about an artist, particularly when they may not be getting attention during touring, is very helpful. Liners, sweepers, and station IDs from artists, always classic moves. And then I'll get into the next one in just a second, but we had an idea, CJ and I, another personal touch you can add to liners, sweepers, and station IDs to connect with artists in the greater world is if you get a new single from an artist, ask if they can record a pre-roll. Like, for example, one that WKNC just got was from Jeff Rosenstock. So instead of just saying, hi, this is Jeff Rosenstock and you're listening to WKNC 88.1, you could say something along the lines of, this is Jeff Rosenstock, you're hearing my newest single Blank on WKNC 88.1, which not only addresses the new ad that you have on station, gives the audience the title of the song, gets the station ID out there, and it just sounds a little bit more curated for your station as opposed to just auto-generated like a lot of artists do to get their name on air.
Yeah, and on that note too, if there are ways that you want, you know, liners to go, whether or not it's something more specific or something, you know, that's more general, that is kind of a little bit outside the box, feel free to pitch that to your promoter. I mean, we are giving those artists a list of things to say, and I'm not going to say they'll say anything, but certainly they will, you know, they'll do their best. And so I definitely think that if you feel like your station wants to get clever with something like that and you're expecting, you know, station ID from a promoter, feel free to pitch it.
CJ, do you want to talk about Say Their Name and also the Tiger Bomb meetings?
Sure. Yeah, of course. So I'm sure it probably would be pretty hard to have not seen at this point, because I think every single promoter sent it out several times. But basically, Radio Milwaukee started a hashtag Say Their Names campaign, which is also a you know, sweeper that we've sent out that you can play on air, and that's available pretty much with every promoter. I know it's gotten a couple of like standalone emails as well, so it should be somewhere in your inbox if that's something that you're looking to promote. And it's pretty powerful. Shill at Tiger, that was kind of set up by Shill over at Tiger Bomb, and Shill's been hosting weekly meetings with kind of a variety of different people, radio promoters, music directors, label people, just some more like tangential music industry folks. I think those meetings were on Tuesdays, but I think they just voted to make them on Fridays now. But you can always email me, and I can facilitate that info to you if you need. But basically, their goal is to discuss kind of ways to amplify marginalized voices in radio, and kind of discuss representation in the college and non-commercial sphere specifically, but I think radio in general. So if you pop into there, you'll see my coworker Luke. He's kind of our Planetary rep, and you'll see probably a lot of other promoters as well. But kind of a good way to have conversations and keep kind of all the momentum from this moment moving, so that it doesn't slow down, at least as far as radio is concerned.
Yeah, and just to touch on that, I'm sure you've all realized that we have an incredible platform, and whether we use that to promote artists or to promote current events, newscasting, or otherwise, one thing that can be done during remote working is the hashtag Say Their Name campaign, or just connecting with local officials to talk about these issues, simply because it further adds interesting information on air, but also is just another way that you can promote certain things. Last on the classic list is just a really vague staff song, Shoutouts. I think one thing that people really miss during remote working is interpersonal connections, seeing your friends, seeing your loved ones, and increasingly highlighting the work that your staff are doing on social media or on air or on your blog, so on and so forth, by saying like, hi, I'm Laura, I'm the general manager. My favorite song playing on WKNC right now is Student Housing by Truth Club. It just adds, once again, another personal touch. And then moving on to promotion nouveau. You've probably seen this everywhere, but live streams on social media are incredibly popular at the moment. Artists are doing them just to generate engagement, but once again, utilizing our platform, that's another cool thing that you can do to engage with your audience. There's a ton of websites set up that do digital tipping or tip sharing things, so that previous times we would pay our artists, but we may not have that same sort of budget at the moment. But you could live stream, give the artist your platform, set up a little tip jar on your website or something, and kind of, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours type thing. And they can be performances or live stream interviews. I have a really cool vision of doing an interview over Instagram Live and opening up the comment section to audience questions, which then you can facilitate with the artist you're discussing to. Once again, it's all about adding a personal touch to make up for the fact that everything is impersonal at the moment. And then you can do social media takeovers as well. A prominent example that I've seen recently is Haley Williams, whose is at Yeah Williams, front woman of Paramore. She did a social media takeover for a social activism group in her hometown of Nashville called Teens for Equality. Whether you did that with a group in your area or with an artist or something, once again, personal touch, social media takeover, doing something that may be out of your typical content routine may generate more engagement, mess with the algorithm a little bit. And then CJ, if you want to talk about the concept of telethons and the Live Nation drive-through, if you've heard anything about that.
Yeah, not as much the telethons, but definitely these Live Nation drive-ups are, I don't know, it seems like they're becoming slightly, I feel like more are announced every day. But, in theory, the idea that you'd be able to, get somewhere to see a show without having to leave your car, a la classic drive-in movie theater, it's becoming more and more popular. And I'm not really sure whether or not, I don't know, I guess we have yet to really put a lot of that to concept and how effective that'll be. But definitely, I know, I think QC Telethon, they're doing like a rooftop kind of thing. So
right.
It's definitely an option, a possibility if it was something you were trying to set up. And I'm sure definitely if you were trying to do it on a much smaller level than, let's say, Brad Paisley, it would probably be pretty effective.
I think the telethon just highlights the extent to which people are pushing creativity to its limits. There's very much a market for this kind of thing, and if you can find a way to execute it safely and promote your station and promote the artist, there's a lot of interesting things that can be done. Moving on into guest DJ sets, the example that I have is from WKNC. It's called the Nubian Mixtape. It's a series that we've been recently doing with one of our sister student media organizations, which is the Black newspaper on campus called The Nubian Message. Every week they curate a playlist for us, and I mix it into an MP3 or WAV file, send it to my advisor, Jamie, who's in this chat. Hi, Jamie. And she'll put it on air. And it's a guest DJ set. We shout out their social media. We put a liner in that says that this was curated by the Nubian Message. Not only does it add a human voice to the air, because recently I've been going into the studio and DJing the Nubian mixtape, but it's new music that either my music directors didn't put on or that hasn't been played in the past. And you could do that with local artists or artists that you've been promoting. What are they listening to? Obviously, you can talk about a record that an artist has put out for a million years, but a lot of times people want to know new music other than that album. What is your favorite artist listening to? Can they create a playlist? And that's a concept to look into. Community forums, you can go on live or send it a blast email. If you have, it's not a listserv, but a newsletter, you can ask people what kind of engagement would they like to see from you. Make it extremely public that you're interested in doing new things to kind of keep this freshness to your rotation and see what people say. I'm sure that people would just like to be heard, essentially. And then of course there's always new ways to do giveaways, raffles, and etc. Before coronavirus, WKNC was doing this Free Friday concept where we would get records in the mail, and since we don't have a vinyl playing capability on air, we would raffle off the records to our audience members, and obviously the music is already on air, and it would be, thanks for listening to WKNC, here's a free record or something else that we've got in the mail. And there's different ways to do that depending on what your resources are at the moment. Final side note, these ideas are intended to be used even beyond coronavirus. And we're going to talk a little bit at the end about what your stations are doing, because we'd also love to learn from you, as CJ said, conversation style.
Yeah, two other things I'll add to that list a little bit. One is just a lot of stations got back to us immediately saying, hey, we're off air, but we're going to be really pushing, you know, station curated Spotify playlists. And I would definitely still encourage people to do that. Like the ability for artists to get playlisted on Spotify, like adds into this whole other big algorithm of, you know, Spotify or Apple Music, like drawing on that information. And especially if you have a relatively large social reach on those platforms, definitely can be still super helpful. And obviously an easy way to still program music, even if the station technology maybe doesn't allow it. Other thing I want to highlight too, which is a good idea that I know KXRN does it, but I don't know if others do, is a thing called Full Album Friday. They call it Full Album Friday, but basically the idea is they play an album front to back, and they'll involve the artist to kind of come in or do a pre-recorded interview where they talk about not every song maybe, but songs track by track. And it kind of becomes this like full album listening experience that kind of allows you to hear a little bit of the behind the scenes in between songs, which is pretty cool.
I think that's really cool. That's something that I haven't seen before, but and CJ, if you want to comment on this was your quote.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it was like I was saying, feel free to pitch us. Like, you know, I think finding creative ways, like stuff that was mentioned in this, you know, the past 5 minutes, but just almost anything is going to be a way for this all to like survive still. And I think we're always receptive to when stations have interesting ideas for bands. And I think that's more true now than it's probably ever been. So, so if you're thinking of something, feel free to let us know. We've actually just this week revamped our Planetary's tour playlists, or not tour playlists, tour email that we used to send out that would get, you know, let you know which bands were out on the road and potentially looking for opportunities, to just I forget if we called it an interview or interviews and opportunities. I don't remember. It's got some kind of catchy headline. But you'll see that come in your inbox hopefully this week, and that'll have a list of artists that we know for a fact are looking for those opportunities. And you know, obviously we can't guarantee anything because we're simply the go-between, but those are definitely artists on that list that we know are looking for these kinds of opportunities. And so anything, especially if it's an artist that you're charting or having heavy or whatever, feel free to reach out to us. Again, like I say, the worst thing that happens is we just say no, but it's always worth asking, I think.
I agree. Planetary has a couple questions for all of y'all, and then we're going to move into what questions you have for us, kind of talk and facilitate some brainstorming, and as CJ said, info share.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is I feel like the question that's kind of loomed over all of this, but just how has your rotation in programming kind of changed throughout all of this? I mean, both during COVID and through Black Lives Matter. If you've been going to those meetings that Shill's hosting, have you felt like, that information has at all affected your kind of thought process in terms of how you program and through that, as a promoter and as people who service you music, how is it that we can be helpful in whatever you've kind of learned through this process?
And feel free to unmute since we're moving into a conversation. There's no need to type in the chat. We'd love to hear from anyone who has any commentary. Planetary commentary.
I like it.
You're also welcome to answer any of the other questions that we have on this screen. And if no one feels like speaking, we can just move on. But we'll wait for a minute. I apologize that I don't have any elevator music.
Yeah, I can just ask the other questions too. I mean, the other one was just like more generally, what tactics have you kind of adopted during this time? I know that for some states, like a sense of normalcy is kind of returned. So maybe you're just back up and running like normal, which might go away again soon. I don't know. It feels like we're in this topsy-turvy roller coaster. But any info you have on things that you found helpful, I'm sure others will, as find that helpful as well. And I know, we're definitely wanting to learn as much about the evolution of stations through this time as possible. And then, strengths and weaknesses through that time, and how has your relationship with promoters changed in any way, if it has? And how can we best work with you? And that's true right now or just in general. If there's something that has been gnawing at you that you just want to say to a promoter that you think would be more helpful, let us know. Looks like Darren from WPTS said, going to use the chat because my mic's kind of funky, but on-air elements have become voiced by only a few members of a skeleton crew that comes into the station every so often. How do you recommend getting on-air elements voiced by as many people as possible with only a limited amount of people in the station? Laura, you might be better equipped to answer that.
Let me read through that. So on-air elements voiced by Darren, are you looking into like getting, I guess, more people on air? Or what do you mean by voiced by as many people? Can you define that for me?
And while Darren does that, I can answer Jamie, who said there are dozens of CDs sitting unopened in the station. I wonder if this is a push for greater digital delivery of music submissions. Absolutely. I feel like when I'm in talks with an artist or a band about a campaign, one of the things that always shocks them, as it always shocks me, is the reliance on physical media still at this format. That a lot of stations, through technological, limitations or just through preference, still really appreciate that a physical copy will still move the needle a little bit more at this format. But obviously this has seen a sea change in terms of like Jamie's saying, not being able to get to the station to deal with physical CDs or having to pull off entirely. If that's still the case for you as a station, please let your promoter know so that they can know either not to send a CD or to hold on sending a CD until a time when you will be around more and be able to access it and archive it correctly. But yeah, absolutely. I think that especially right now, a lot of stations have seen that kind of pivot and hopefully maybe for the long term too. I mean, Christina, our office manager, I'm sure would absolutely love if she didn't have to be boxing up CDs to send to all the stations on Fridays. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely kind of a major push there. And so that's been kind of an interesting thing to navigate.
And now I'll pivot back to Darren's question. First of all, thank you, Darren, for clarifying. So if anyone's not looking at the chat, what Darren said was they want more liners and promos scheduled throughout the hour that aren't voiced by just the skeleton crew. Skeleton crew referring to the few people that come into their station. What I would immediately say is, first of all, as we referenced earlier, talk to artists or local businesses or local individuals to see if they have the capabilities to be recording some of these for you. And maybe that's stuff that they could do in their own time or with their own equipment. I know that artists have a lot of capabilities. That with a mic and an interface, you can do a lot. But then I would also love to, as I mentioned earlier, extremely highlight the use of digital communications platforms like Zoom and Discord. I've used Discord in the past, but I cannot comment as an expert, but it does have a function that allows you to invite a bot into whatever chat you're using that will record the conversation over their audio interface, and then will automatically download it to whatever drive you connect it to. And I'm gonna scroll back a little bit to pull up a Zoom example. This is a video that I did with WKNC. I'm going to turn my computer sound off. This is a video that I did with WKNC. Please stop. That I recorded over Zoom. The artist was kind enough to do the editing for me, and I'm using the same background that I use today. But the audio quality is not half bad. And Zoom is really handy because what it'll do is it'll record the MP4 video and then also will record a separate track of the audio, which then you can cut and splice. That's Tennis Elbow. They're from Wilmington, North Carolina. But I'll pause for a second so you can hear me talking to them. And I was using my AirPods, but even my MacBook speakers would be just fine.
I don't think it's playing. Yeah, Laura, I don't think the audio is working.
Oh, well, I apologize for that. Yeah, I truly, let's see.
But for
I don't know how to make that happen.
I'll piggyback off that and say that, you know, in spite of whatever theoretically evil things Zoom might be involved in, the reason that it kind of became the de facto piece of technology through this time is because the audio sounds great. I would also say if you're just trying to figure out ways to get, you know, more students involved in recording liners and promos or whatever, I would say your phone speaker is excellent and can give you pretty decent recording, especially when used correctly. So always more food for thought that I think a lot of people don't realize that you're, you know, especially if you have a standard iPhone, your audio recording on there, I forget what that app's called, Memo Record or whatever, is great.
Voice memos.
Memos. Yeah, sounds awesome. So definitely consider that as well.
If I could play off.
Yeah,
sorry.
You can go first.
If I could play off that for a second, CJ. In my audio production class, we use Voice Record Pro, which is a free app for all the different phones and such. We actually have students doing voice tracking for shows with that. And then they would put the show together using something like Reaper Audition or Audacity and present me with a 2-hour show. We've also invited some alum to take part and fill in some of the gaps, which they absolutely love. And we've got some people that are still in the field and doing things, so that's kind of cool. But we have people sending us shows from Austin, from upstate New York, from Serbia, from all over the place. Wow. And it's plugging some nice gaps, and people are really happy to hear the voices back on the air.
Yeah, I bet.
I agree with that completely. WKNC runs a show called Eye on the Triangle, and our public affairs director is currently operating from Kentucky. So what I would say, and what I was going to say previously, is just to get as many voices on air, make the information like accessible. Email out what we've suggested, email out whatever you can find online, and just let your students know, even if they're not your paid staff members, these are ways that we can get your voice on air. We miss you. We'd like for you to do this. And it truly doesn't take too long to find a public domain music bed and record 15 seconds of you not stuttering into your computer, and then you've got a liner. There's also, like, as we've mentioned previously, personal connection is really great. Whether it's a student saying their favorite song or just saying, "Hi, I'm Laura, I'm the general manager. Can't wait to be back in studio, but thanks for listening to WKNC." It's very cute to use a diminutive phrase.
To piggyback off something that Jamie said in the chat, said one comment that came up months ago is that in COVID times, there's no such thing as broadcast quality. Good enough is good enough right now. And I think anyone who's watched anything that's happened in the late night sphere on YouTube over the past, 4 or 5 months has probably realized that early on you were watching Conan O'Brien speak into his phone the same way that everyone else is. And if it's good enough for Conan O'Brien, it's for sure good enough, for the airwaves, I would think. But yeah.
Would anyone like to comment on the other questions that we had? Strengths and weaknesses, relationship with promoters, how promotional companies can be modified to meet you where you're at, so on and so forth.
If you want to tell us that we send too many emails, I get it.
Let me make sure I have the chat up. And if not, we can totally just pivot and see if anyone has any suggestions for what their station has been doing during this time that they'd like to share with others. But also, if it's your best kept secret, I won't be mad at you. I will take that as a time to pivot. We can always come back. Yes, if anyone wants to share, I will be taking digital notes through this so I can send out these ideas along with the slides if you so desire. And we would just love to have a brainstorm session to better benefit all of our platforms.
Hello. So we were totally shut down. I haven't been to my office since March 23rd. And I've been furloughed from my university since then, and the students weren't allowed to do anything, but the station's on automation and it's still running. It's just running 3 months old, everything. Kind of some ideas, if you've already, kind of been shut down and come back, we're looking at, we don't know what our options are for fall, if we're going to be let back in that building or not. Kind of how have you motivated people to get back into it? That's the part. I mean, I know that my diehards are going to come back no matter what, but how am I going to recruit new people when they're like, this, I've never even heard of this?
Mm-hmm. Obviously, anyone else is welcome to comment on that. We've got a bunch of advisors in this chat, so I know that there's a lot of professional opinions that could be shared. But from a student's perspective, I think that making your platform remotely accessible is perhaps the best way to get people involved. I know it's extremely hard to do training for equipment when you are worried about social distancing guidelines, but as I mentioned earlier, it's pretty easy to make a 1-hour playlist to share online, on air, if you can program it remotely. And Zoom meetings to talk about music and albums, kind of reorienting it towards maybe a club as opposed to a job, maybe a way to get people involved and then transition them into the more standard practices that we had before coronavirus. The biggest concept that I'm trying to think about as a general manager currently is how to meet people where they're at and overcome that hurdle of fear of returning to public spaces. So just allowing people to do whatever they can is going to be my go-to, I think. And I think Paul had his hand up.
Well, actually, I didn't. I was waving at the next DJ that came in because we are on the air and we have live people here. But I do have something to add. But thank you. I think one of the things is, and Laura, you hit it. It's engagement and how to keep people involved. You've got to give them as many opportunities and options as possible. I think one of the things that we did when we broke, I had a discussion with my school, and I'm lucky enough to have a good community staff. So we've been on the air 24/7 since the middle of March. I'm in the office 5 days a week. I'm one of a handful of people allowed on campus, but we're also a school of about 2,500 as opposed to thousands. So we can move on things like that. But what I did was I put the word out to all of the students that were remaining, all of the community staff, and said, are you interested in doing remote stuff? And I just defined that as pre-record. So I went through and I did individual tutoring sessions if I had to, or directed them to the right materials, software, and how to do it. what we're going to do moving forward is we're going to make that required of anybody that comes on, that they're going to have to sit through how do you use Audition or Reaper or Audacity or even GarageBand. You can put together some things, and I think I have some people that started off really slow, but some of my people have really grabbed it and ran with it to the point where people say they can't tell if it's somebody in the studio or if it's somebody that's recorded there 2-3 hours. So it is looking for those options, looking for those ideas. And we are basically a club here. We don't have any requirement for any of our students to be a Mediacom person or anything like that. There's no special training to get on other than how do you use the board, how do you pick the stuff, and please be respectful of the FCC because we like our license. And as I point out, the first call comes to me, the second comes to them. And if the fine starts at $10,000, I'm sure their parents aren't happy. And if I lose my job over something like that, I won't be happy. But you know, it is meeting them where you can. Do what you can. I love the fact that one of our reps, or one of our alum used to be involved with Mute Records, and she's going to be starting to do some stuff for us because she left Mute and is on a public radio station in New York. So she's going to start sending some stuff to us. Reach out to anybody, because this is, I'm presuming most of the stations are like ours in the sense that when people graduate, this is one of the things they really remember about school. And whether they go on to become doctors, lawyers, teachers, or anything else. I mean, the people that come up to me at Alumni Day and say, oh, this was great. You know, not everybody's going to go on and become the senior editor at Rolling Stone, but we have one of those, you know, and that's cool. But they love this stuff, and they would probably want to get involved if they can, even if it's a 1 hour a week alumni spotlight show.
You could also kind of, and this is maybe this is maybe a little corny, but you could add incentives. I know a lot of our students, we have a lot of DJs, for which I'm very grateful. And a lot of times when my program director is scheduling semesterly shifts, there can be some contention between top hours. You know, no one wants to take the 10 p.m. Friday night shift. So you could make note of students who do remote work and then give them first picks when we're back to in-studio work. You know, thank you for doing us this service. You get whatever hour you want next time. Gold star.
That's actually, that's sort of built into ours, since we are a club, that you get certain service hours for depending on what roles you perform. And if you step up and we don't compensate our board financially. So what we can do is, if you're the station manager, you get first slot. You get to pick where you're going to be. And that's a pretty big thing. And especially now with everything that's going on with the Black Lives Matters and such, this year is the first year we have a student station manager who is a person of color. And she's, during the summer and during the break, she's ran with it. And she's turned an hour of her 2-hour show into interviews with other students of color and faculty and dealing with this. So it's something that we, you know, we're able to help support and bring a voice that's impacted by the movement. Not that we aren't all impacted, but somebody that's there and can speak from a much different position than I can, or some of our other DJs can, which I think is really kind of cool.
I agree completely. And I think that ties in directly to what CJ was saying earlier about how sometimes music can feel inconsequential at the moment. And I think relating to our topic of engagement, if you give students the platform, well, perhaps with some copy editing, because you don't want them ranting and saying whatever they want. If you give students the platform to talk about things that are important to them, and that they give them the resource to make an impact on the world around them, I think that that's incentive in and of itself. I've noticed at WKNC, myself and 2 other staff members, as well as my advisor, Jamie, we've developed an internal little content council where we talk about how we want to portray various social issues and what we can do to contribute to it and have an impact. And I think that that's been an internal excitement that I haven't seen prior to the beginning of quarantine. You know, it was just kind of like, what are we doing on social media next? And now it's what can we do on social media next? And that context is extremely different. Does anyone else have any brainstorming ideas for artistry, however? Or questions about what you think could be cool if you've got a brainstorm little idea that you haven't developed into a concept yet? Scrolling through. Look at chat. Well, I guess unless we have any objections, we've been having this conversation for almost an hour at this point. So I do believe we've hit a stopping point if everyone's comfortable with that. I see no objections. Thanks. So thank you again to CJ for having this conversation with me, and to everyone who attended. At the bottom of this slide, as you can see, is CJ's information as well as the Planetary contact info, and both my station email and my student representative email if you'd like to get in touch further.
Yep, feel free to reach out by email, or I'm pretty easy to find on the social media. And yeah, if you guys ever need anything from Planetary or just want a promoter's perspective on something, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to lend my time.
And if you've got any successful projects, whether it was an idea from this slide or something that you do in the future, feel free to send it to the CBI listserv. We'd love to both support you in your success and also learn from what you do. So thank you for being here and for the 50 minutes of your time.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye.